to get started. I would like to introduce Kaizen's own Ethan Mueller.
Thank you, William. Hello and welcome to our Tech to Tech session this evening. We're going to be talking about corrosion protection, corrosion inhibitors, rust preventatives, RPs, CPs, whatever you might happen to call them. We're going to talk about which product might be right for your parts. So when we're looking to implement some sort of RP or CP application into our manufacturing line, there's a few questions that we really need to ask ourselves to get ourselves going in the right direction. First and foremost is we need to determine what metals our parts are being made from. When it comes to ferrous parts, those parts tend to need their own specific application, something like copper, brass, and aluminum. These parts can oftentimes be protected in a similar application. There is seemingly more products out there for those ferrous metals, and that makes sense because ferrous parts tend to be more susceptible to rusting. The other things we need to ask ourselves is how much protection, how long term of protection do we need? And that question goes hand in hand with these next two questions. What storage conditions are our parts going to be subject to? And what are the transit conditions that our parts are going to undergo? Unfortunately, there's no magic formula that we can plug into and say, you know, this is going to give us 90 days protection or this is going to give us 180 days protection. It's more of a test to see kind of what protection we can expect. Another thing that's worth considering when we're looking at RP products or CP products is the product cost. You know, oftentimes someone might say, well, why don't I just go with the product that's going to give me the longest term of protection? And that's fine. It just so happens that those products tend to be more expensive. The raw materials that they're made from tend to be more expensive, and therefore those products tend to be a little bit more expensive. So if we're looking for 3 days or like 10 days protection, we might want to look for a product that is a little bit more geared towards that term of protection as opposed to something that might give us, say, 180 days protection. So this kind of leads us into the next, you know, are we looking for a wet coating application or are we looking for a dry film application? And when I'm saying wet versus dry, I'm not talking about one product versus another. I'm talking about one product line versus another product line. And in theory, either of these would work for your parts. It's just, you know, maybe there's some nuance about your manufacturing process that makes one of these a little bit better of a choice than the other. So starting out with wet or water displacing products, these products are going to give us the longest term of protection. Anytime we're looking for more than 6 months of protection, we're certainly going to want to look at wet or water displacing products. These are good choices for parts that are going to be subject to extreme humidity or wet conditions. They'll definitely do a better job than the dry films will in those sorts of conditions. A really nice feature about these products is they can protect all metals. And so really what you're doing is you're creating a barrier between atmospheric conditions and the surface of your metal. And you're doing this in some sort of dip application or immersion process. And you're using the product at 100% concentration. And so when parts come out, they actually feel wet or they're moreover oily to the touch. And because of this, we typically can't paint over or process over this. And for those reasons, we often need to remove this before we do further downstream processes to our parts, you know, whether we're going to do some sort of painting or something like this. Dry film products, these also give a relatively long-term protection. However, if we're looking at if we need, you know, less than 180 days protection or even better, less than 90 days of protection, these dry film products tend to be really good for that sort of protection. One of the drawbacks to the dry films is that you actually need to pair the product to the metal. You know, once again, the ferrous metals, the steel and things like that, they need their own application. They need their own RP product to be applied to them. Whereas brass, copper, aluminum, those can all in general terms be protected in a similar application. Your other exotic alloys or something like this, you look at those on an individual basis. and try to select the right product for those. So dry films are usually diluted in an aqueous solution, which gives us a little bit of playing around room. We can increase the concentration maybe to give us a little bit more protection. And when parts come out of dry film application, they feel dry to the touch. They're waxy, but very little appearance depending on what the concentration is. You might get a white haze the higher the concentration. And a really nice thing about most dry film applications is that you can paint directly over them, or you can work it into an assembly. We have a lot of customers who actually will use dry film as a lubricant to prevent some sort of metal on metal abrasion if they're doing some sort of assembly or something like this. And also you can paint directly over these products. So let's say we have our CP or RP application and it's working just fine, and suddenly we start to experience corrosion issues. The first thing I would do is check the upstream processes, moreover the cleaning process. Typically, parts are fed from a cleaning process into an RP or CP application. So I would go upstream and look at that cleaning process and make sure the parts are coming out clean. Try to make any corrections, and hopefully our corrosion issue goes away downstream. If that's not the case, the next step, or actually we probably look at this, either of these simultaneously. The next thing I'd look at is the CP process itself. Make sure that we're getting the right amount of coating on our parts. Maybe we need to increase the concentration to increase the film thickness or the film weight. If we're experiencing corrosion with a wet coating, then maybe we want to think about submerging the parts, because once again, those films are applied at 100%. So if we are experiencing corrosion issues with them, we can actually submerge the parts for maximum protection. Something we've seen in the field before is where the parts are going into the dry stage. Typically what you see is the CP or the RP is applied in a wash machine and some sort of parts cleaning machine. And so the parts go through a wash stage, a rinse stage where the CP is applied, and then they go into a dry stage, and this might have some sort of air knives in it. And so we've seen where the air knives actually have a tendency to blow the RP or the CP away. So you might have the impression that you have a nice coating on there when in fact you do not, leaving your parts susceptible and kind of making you think, what's going on here? Another thing that's worthwhile if you're seeing random parts pop up rusty is to investigate the handling processes. Watch your operators. Maybe you have a new operator or something like this at the back end of a machine who's handling parts without gloves, and you might see some fingerprint rust spots show up. So it shouldn't be too hard to figure out who that employee might be. And then another thing that needs to be taken into consideration is seasonality. You'll see a process that's ticking along just fine, and all of a sudden you get into July or August, those more humid months, and people start to experience a little bit more rusting or corrosion. And if that's the case, if you are not applying an RP, maybe it's time you do that. You start doing that ahead of time to protect those parts, or you can up your concentration with the dry film or the wet film, submerge the parts. Something I think is really worth mentioning is, if this is what we're going to use for protecting our parts, we need to eliminate direct exposure to water. Any direct contact with water is going to degrade those coatings and leave our parts susceptible. If you can't eliminate direct exposure to water, you need to probably look into some sort of other process. That's not what RP or CP is. It's not designed to protect from direct contact with water. Something I really encourage a lot of my customers to do is a corrosion study. And essentially what we're doing is we are subjecting our parts to harsh conditions, and essentially saying, that these are extremely harsh conditions. So therefore, 1 day in this humidity chamber is roughly equal to 9 days in the real world, or like a 10-day test would roughly tell us what 90 days in the real world would look like. So this is really something I would encourage you to look at, do that corrosion study, really get a good, comfortable feeling of what you can expect for protection out of your RP process. The final thing worth mentioning, I suppose, is these CPs, they're not designed for permanent protection. They're really more of a placeholder until that part is going to go into some sort of final assembly, or it's going to be, some other sort of metal finishing, conversion coating type of thing. So if you're looking for permanent protection, once again, RP, CP, that's not that. So you should consider painting or some sort of other metal finishing. A little shameless plug here is you can paint directly over a lot of the dry film products in many applications. So just a really nice feature to those products. In conclusion, we want to look at wet versus dry when we're trying to select a CP or RP process. We need to take into consideration what our parts are subject to, what are the storage conditions, what are the transit conditions, and then from there, it's somewhat of a matter of preference. We want to avoid corrosion by maintaining our upstream processes, our CP processes, ensuring that our handling processes are good. And of course, we want to test anything prior to going into production. Really, allow us to know what we can expect with these RP, CP processes, and avoid having to create any scrap or rework or anything like this. And if we're looking for permanent protection, we want to consider painting or some sort of metal finishing, conversion coating, or what have you. And before I turn it over to William with any questions, I just want to say, we have a great tech-to-tech library. There's been a lot of other tech-to-techs done that discuss corrosion and preventing it. And we also just have a lot of general cleaning topic videos in there. So if you're having any sort of cleaning issue or any sort of process issue, I encourage you to go sift through that and see what you can find. It's a really great resource. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to William with any questions, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. If you would like to discuss this topic further, please contact your local Kaizen representative or send an email to tech@kaizen.com. And we will have one of our cleaning experts schedule a follow-up with you as soon as possible. Again, we thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great day.